entitled Recommendations for the Origination, Relay, and Delivery of Radiogram ICS213 Messages. I'm going to minimize the little thumbnails there. And so let's dig right into this. So to begin with, I just want to have a little bit of a disclaimer. Normally, for example, when we publish an example of mistakes, say, for example, in the QNI newsletter or in a program, we'll redact information that identifies perhaps the originating station, the addressee, things of this nature. We're not doing that in this program. Hopefully we won't embarrass anybody, but in order to understand the mistakes that they're made and their impact on the emergency communications process, we need to kind of show the whole message. So the disclaimer here is, look, we all make mistakes. And if you happen to see your call sign associated with one of the errors shown in the forthcoming slides, please don't take it personally. It's not reflective of operating skills. We all make mistakes. People are always learning. They're always developing. But anyway, we didn't redact any identities in some of the examples that we use in the training program. So there's my disclaimer before we get started. So to begin with, let's talk a little bit about ICS213, and we kind of alluded to this in the informal discussions we had before the start of the formal training. But radio amateurs often confuse the concept of a standard, a message form, and a message format. Okay, the ICS213 standard is really an accountability standard defined in the NIMS process. So essentially, NIMS requires certain accountability information, a name, a position, for example, title of agency, a subject perhaps, which actually I guess is technically optional, but a subject field, date, time, and so forth. Really, if you take a close look at the ICS213 standard, it defines what we used to call the interoffice memorandum. Where you had a date, you had to, you had from, you had a subject, and then of course you said it's a memorandum, and then you went into whatever type of directive you might be issuing to your subordinates within some type of organization. And so in many respects, the NIMS standard defines minimum accountability. And the accountability exists, number one, to ensure a coherent emergency response process. Does the individual making a request, issuing a directive, etc., have the authority to do so? At what time did he ask for something? And if we have to go back due to an error or to, for example, investigate a significant negligence or gross negligence, do we have a record? And that's really what ICS213 is it's a minimum standard. And of course, to define the standard, the federal government and so forth created let's call it a template for a form, often called the general message form. And you'll often hear people say, well, you have to use the general message form. But as we were kind of informally discussing before, the thing with standards, for example, a favorite analogy of mine is a meat packing plant. Okay, now it sounds like a silly analogy, but the federal government defines minimum standards for inspection, cleanliness, etc., in a meat packing plant. And that plant has to meet those minimum federal standards, but a state can issue additional standards that exceed the minimum. And likewise, the company itself can implement standards that exceed the minimum. And we see this very much with ICS213s. We see the ICS213s that are expanded upon, additional fields are added, they're modified for specific emergency services environments, law enforcement, public health, hospitals, things of this nature. So again, the point I'm really trying to make here is that the minimum ICS213 is a standard. It defines minimum accountability, but the ICS213 is really not designed as a tool for conveying communications traffic. Okay? And this is a mistake that a lot of radio amateurs make, is that in order for messages to flow in a complex network, there's additional network management data that's required. Okay, and you see this with emails. You know, it's generally not visible in modern email applications, but every email has appended to it a large amount of network management data. Okay, and so you can dig into that, see it. Well, that's to ensure messages flow through the internet from point of origination to point of destination. So if you put an ICS213 in a regular email as text, perhaps unseen to you or unnoticed is a wide variety of network management data. And really all a radiogram is it's a message similar to an ICS213 to which we append network management data. Now the radiogram, of course, has a long and rich history in various forms, beginning with the telegram. And then, of course, as wireless communications was invented, the radio telegram evolved. And then, of course, you know, the radiogram, as it's commonly called. And it's not a new concept. The telegraph companies, the international radio communications companies like RCA, Radio Marine, McKay, etc., very quickly realized that they needed not just accountability, but they needed network management data, message serial numbers, universal time, information on who the operator was that was responsible for formatting and injecting the message into the system. All of these things were kind of developed well over 150 years ago, in the 1850s and so forth. And they live on today in email. So radiogram really is just a message, almost like a letter or an ICS213, wrapped by a radiogram wrapper in which network management data is appended. Okay, so again, just to reiterate, you know, NIMS ICS213 is a standard. It defines minimum accountability, whereas the radiogram or an email, for that matter, is designed to keep a message intact and facilitate servicing, replies, and routing within a complex network. So a radiogram is nothing more than a radio email that can be transmitted by any type of mode. Of course, people like familiarity, and as a result, when back in 2015, I guess it was, perhaps 2016, Radio Relay International solicited examples of ICS213 messages from ARIES and MCOM groups, RACES groups, etc., throughout the United States. And we took a look at all these different ICS213 messages, and we did this with the idea of identifying best practices, okay? Particularly with the idea of how we would format or reformat the radiogram in such a manner that it resembles and functions as an ICS213, yet retains that network management data. Furthermore, we wanted to identify practices in which the ICS213 message wrapped within the radiogram could move seamlessly through the traffic network using a similar methodology to what has historically been used. So we didn't have to retrain radio operators, so that we could handle both the routine radiograms and the radiogram ICS213 messages. The result was a number of outcomes, one of which is the development of RRI Form 1703 and 1704, which are entitled the Radiogram ICS213 message. And we'll show you some examples of those. And those are forms that were developed in response to best practices. And then, of course, the development of the radiogram, RRI Radiogram ICS213 template in cooperation with the WinLink organization, the Amateur Radio Safety Foundation. And so those were probably the two primary developments that came out of this identification of best practices within the MCOM and traffic communities. Ultimately, the radiogram ICS213 is just a radiogram, somewhat configured and designed for both the additional mandatory accountability data that's required by the ICS213 standard, and of course, arranged in such a manner that it can be injected into the traffic system, relayed by pretty much any experienced traffic operator without confusion. So this is a typical, on the left here, you can see a typical radiogram ICS213 message as it arrives at the gateway, the WinLink RRI interface, okay, at the region level. So here you can see, for example, the network management data at the top, the message serial number, message precedence, handling instructions, station of origin, of course, the group count or check, place of origin, that is the location of the address of the individual who originates the message, a date time group. Okay, that's our network management data. And I'm not going to dig into why this exists and what the purposes of each of these components, but we do a pretty thorough apologia for this network management data in our training class TR002, Introduction to the Traffic System. But here you can see, for example, after the name, you can see the mandatory title and agency or position. You can see the subject field that is associated with the basic ICS213 general message. Likewise, down here at the bottom, we have the from line, or in the case of the radiogram, we would call it the signature. And you can see the mandatory position or title and agency associated with the general message form. Okay. So in many respects, basically what we're doing is we're developing or providing a template that calls for this additional data when it's available. The sequence of these messages are designed to match RRI Form 1703 and 1704 so that the radio operator can very easily populate these forms when delivering the message, or when originating the message, the form calls for these particular requirements. And we're going to show you some examples of this. The idea here is to be interoperable between digital, voice, CW, and the like. A single message format, a single methodology, so that messages can flow seamlessly between modes. And likewise, of course, we want to be compatible with the traditional net procedures used for transmitting and relaying radiograms. So here again, we have a juxtaposition of the same message. You can look at the RRI Form 1703 on the right. At the very top, of course, we have our network management data, which is pretty much standard for any radiogram. We can see here the name of the addressee, the position or title and agency, of course, an address, telephone, email, other delivery information. Unlike the radiogram, the signature here at the bottom of the radiogram on the form is moved up to the from line. Okay, this is what many agencies expect, to, from, message. Okay, but when you transmit it on the net, basically the signature, of course, is transmitted in the same position as it always would be in a standard radiogram message. Then, of course, we have our text. One additional thing that we did add to the form was a block here for local time conversion. So as we've discussed in other training classes, many states have more than one time zone. Nebraska is a good example, Wyoming, I think, Michigan, Indiana, etc. The idea here is that the default time of origin for the radiogram, of course, is UTC, Zulu, UTC time. And the idea here is that the delivering operator is best qualified to convert that UTC time to local time without confusion. So the delivering operator can basically translate time of origin here, okay, to local time if it's desired by the agency. So that's an additional field here in blue that we add to the message. Then the rest of the radiogram components are there, right? We have, basically some of the record-keeping data, who we received the message from, who the message was delivered to or relayed to, things of that nature. So as you can see, it's basically a pretty typical basic radiogram ICS213. And basically what you can do is you can go ahead and transmit the ICS213 as a radiogram. And then, of course, when you deconstruct it, you might say, and format it for delivery, a familiar ICS213 sequence appears at the other end. So that's our basic concept here. And again, the idea here is to be interoperable, right? So, you don't know how messages are going to flow to reach that last mile or that point of delivery. So here's a juxtaposition that I think is instructive. So here we have an identical message, one of which is presented on a standard RRI radiogram form. I think this is our 1801 message form. And here you have one in ICS213 format. But all the basic material, the mandatory minimums here can easily be incorporated into a standard radiogram. In other words, functionally, there's really no difference between the basic ICS213 message and a properly serviced radiogram, with the exception that you need to have network management data to manage the network, route services messages, and route replies, and to keep track of things like date time groups, precedence, that is how important the message is, and so forth. So you can see that these are essentially identical messages. Colonel Becker would likely understand the message in either format. And this is the idea behind interoperability, right? Basic, universal, simple, easily understood. So let's talk about this concept of interoperability before we dig deeper into the ICS213 message. It's really important to understand that messages may move through multiple networks. They may move between modes. They may even move between radio services. So, for example, I may transmit a message via digital mode to an EOC, but the addressee may be located off-site. That message might be transferred to, say, a public safety talk group to get the message to the addressee. A message may be originated in the field from a low-power CW transceiver and be moved to a voice network within the amateur radio service. Perhaps a message is originated by amateur radio. It arrives, say, at a government facility or even at a radio amateur's house. And the only method that's practical to deliver that message might be a telephone call. Messages, it's easy to imagine that messages will always stay on your preferred digital mode or your digital network, but really in a significant disaster where there's lots of complexity going on, lots of players, we really don't know ultimately, in every case, how a message is going to be delivered once it reaches its destination, or even for that matter, how it might need to be relayed to fill a gap in a network. So the idea of interoperability is that we want to have a very basic message form. We want to have limited punctuation. We want to have brevity. We want to have brief, efficient content. We want to limit abbreviations and so forth, so that message can easily flow, say, from a digital mode to a voice mode. And if you want to see an amateur network, or for that matter, quite frankly, even a government or military network come up really fast, require that network handle mixed case. And you know, yeah, in 1970, an Associated Press telegraph operator could send stories with complex punctuation and you know, the Phillips Code and capitalization and all this kind of thing. But he was a professional who did the job, you know, for years and developed a highly specialized skill. So in reality, if you want a message that's truly interoperable, you have to encourage brevity. You have to have efficient content. You have to limit punctuation to prevent confusion. And essentially you're transmitting the message in all caps or in all lowercase, you might say, but it's not going to have mixed case unless it stays on a digital circuit. For example, a point-to-point circuit between maybe a local EOC and the state EOC, then it's not an issue. But when you start talking about a network like RRI, like NTS nets, where you know there's this nationwide, for that matter, international network with nets in Asia and Oceania, and Europe, and all over the US and parts of Canada, you really don't know how that message is going to flow through the network. So the basic message here is brevity is always the soul of emergency communications. We want to avoid that unnecessary punctuation. We want to avoid unwieldy numbers or confusing abbreviations. We want to avoid unnecessary repetition. We generally want to spell out scientific nomenclature. So we might say 1013.5 millibars instead of initials like Bravo, etc. One of the things that you would have to do in originating a radiogram ICS213 message is indicate so. And we're in the process of developing handling instructions to specify when a message should be delivered, say, as an RRI radiogram message, or when it should be delivered using the RRI Form 1703. And that will be forthcoming here at a later date. But obviously, there needs to be some indication to the relaying and delivering operators that there are some nuances associated with the radiogram that they're handling. So let's dig into some OXCOM training messages and see some of the problems that can arise when people aren't thinking about interoperability. Okay, so let's start with this message. Okay, I'm going to open up the floor, and you guys, I guess, can either speak if you want, unmute and offer your opinion, or I guess you could post chat. But of course, this is where working in a classroom is a little bit better. But can you identify the unnecessary content in this message? Okay, I think somebody's talking. Let's see. I see a chat. So let me open up chat. Gotta go. Several new fires. Yeah, okay. Oh, okay. Barry, sorry you have to leave. This will be recorded, of course. So let me know after you look at the video whether or not there's any issues. Okay, so anybody want to volunteer what the unnecessary information is here on this guy?
Well, it looks to me he's doing this greetings, and I don't think that's necessary. You just got to, you know, and like this message, as we know, to introduce message, I mean, you could just say new message. This is the format.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, you certainly could cut down on the number of words, but I'm looking for something a little bit different, and I'll give you a clue. I'll give you a little hint. It exists in the subject line of the ICS213 content. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and disclose it here in the interest of time. But
would it be the word radiogram?
It's this number right here, the 2021-070-1527. Okay. So what we really have here is somebody has created their own date-time group format within the subject line. Okay. But if we look at this radiogram ICS213, we already have 3 date-time groups appended to the message, right? We have one that was a timestamp when it was injected into the system, into the digital system. We have, of course, the official date time group here, 1525 local, July 3. But then we also have a date time group here, okay, which is 2021, July 31st, or I guess that's July 3rd, I'm sorry, July 3rd at 1527, although it doesn't specify if that's Zulu or local time or whatever the case might be. So now if you imagine having to take this message to a voice or CW net, there's a great potential here for wasting time. And so when you start thinking about interoperability, you have to uncondition yourself for the email era. So I think many of us, I was educated by the Christian Brothers of Northern Ireland and had quite an exposure to Victorian literature. And I used to joke about Victorian literature that the basic rule was never use one word when 100 words will do. Email and modern methods of communications, with perhaps the exception of the text message, tend to incorporate a lot of extraneous information. I think we've all encountered this at work, right? Where, you know, somebody could probably say in 15 or 20 words what needs to be said in a business email, but instead you get 2 or 3 paragraphs. And so the message here is that understanding that a message may not stay on a digital circuit, we want to minimize the amount of time it would take to transmit or relay that message to a voice network, for example. And so this whole date time group here is really unnecessary. And quite frankly, it's confusing. So if I'm the delivering station, okay, I don't know if this message, well, I can pretty much guess that the message was injected here at this time on the network at 1930, but the message was drafted either at 1525 local time or at 1527 local time. So I've got 3 date time groups associated with this message, which are quite frankly in conflict with each other. And of course, we'll dig into that a little bit more. But that's the major problem with this particular example, okay? Another question to ask yourself is what happens if the L is lost in transmission, either by typographical error on a digital circuit or lost, say, on a voice or radio telegraph circuit, or it's accidentally converted to Zulu, okay? So now all of a sudden we might have a discrepancy of several hours in this message, okay? As a general rule, the date time group in the network management data of the radiogram should always represent the time at which the message was drafted and tendered for origination by the individual who signs it. Okay, so if you imagine instead of this being a training message, the signature might be Bill Maureen, you know, Emergency Management Director, New Hanover County. Okay, and if this had an important role in the emergency management process, what's most important is not when somebody got around to injecting it into the digital network. What's really important is when Bill Maureen here, okay, drafted the message, tendered it for origination. So imagine yourself in a really busy command post or EOC, and somebody, you know, people are handing you messages fast and furious, and they're starting to stack up. And you're getting a little bit behind, maybe by 15, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, getting some of these into a data terminal. Or for that matter, imagine that you misplaced one of them. The emergency management process is heavily invested in temporal sequence. That is the sequence at which events occur. The time at which I injected into the digital system or injected into the net is really pretty irrelevant. As far as the decision-making process, that is the data flow within the emergency management environment is concerned, what's important is when this message was drafted by the originator, that is the person who signs the message. And these are this is the information that counts right up here in the preamble of the radiogram, okay? And the last thing you want to do is start creating confusion and so forth. And ideally, the Zulu time is preferable because, again, a message may be injected into a data node that's 3 or 4 states away, depending upon propagation. It may be rerouted into another traffic net, and we don't want to have that confusion associated with the message. Okay, so again, unless you have a known circuit and it's point to point, or you know it's staying within your time zone, local time is really not preferred for a message moving through the traffic system. Okay, so for example, in a widespread disaster, we might, as a matter of fact, we very likely would establish priority entry point operators to expedite the flow of priority traffic to different agencies. They might be at 10 and 14 megahertz. They could be 3 time zones away. Okay, so a Zulu is definitely preferred in that regard. And again, as we mentioned earlier, the radiogram-ICS213 forms do have a field for conversion from UTC to local time by the delivering operator, whether that's a traffic operator in the same community or an ARIES operator in an EOC or whatever the case might be. Oops, we kind of missed one here. Here's another example of where confusion come in. Okay, this is another message. So again, I want you to imagine yourself processing hundreds of messages, say per hour, or maybe 50 messages per hour, even in a EOC during a major event. Okay, the most important thing is temporal context, and you don't want to make mistakes with time. So take a look at this message. Okay, here's our date time group in the preamble, that is in the network management data of the radiogram. And this message says 0050 Zulu, July 21. But in the subject line, the originator, KE4LFP, or Tim here, the Oxcom operator, has indicated July 20th at 0053. So this begs the question, when was the message actually drafted? When was it, written out and tendered for origination? And we don't know. Was it July 20th or July 21st? Was it at 0050 Zulu, or was it 0053 Zulu? I have no idea, and I suspect none of you do as well. Let me take a quick look at chat. Yeah, it says there was a delay. Yeah, somebody speculated that, there's a time delay from when it was drafted to when it was put into the system. But really, let's as a matter of fact, we can deal with that in the next slide. So let's go to the next slide. This is a theoretical example, but it's quite realistic to emergency response situations. Let's say, for example, that we're in the EOC and we want to know the status periodically of the number of the capacity of various trauma centers or emergency rooms at various hospitals in our area. Okay, now that's going to change, from minute to minute, and it's a pretty important piece of information. In a mass casualty incident, where will we route ambulances? Where will we transport injured parties to? In which hospital will we select? And it would be very important to know the capacity at any point in time at various hospitals. If you look along the left column, okay, time is very intrinsically associated with the data. Okay, it really doesn't matter. I mean, obviously, we want the message to get there on a timely basis, but what's really important is when, for example, Beaumont had 13 beds available, or when Beaumont had 7 beds available. Okay, and when Mount Carmel reached 0 beds available, and nobody cares really when you typed it into the terminal or when you manage to get your turn on the radio net. Okay, and that's kind of the fine point that we're putting on this, is that temporal misplacement in this particular example could result in casualties being sent to a hospital without sufficient capacity, right? So date time group is a critical factor in these messages, okay? So again, we could spend many, many hours on this, but I think we've belabored the point on date time groups. But again, looking in the upper right-hand corner, this is the time the signatory, the person in the from line or the signature, drafted the message and tendered it for origination, okay? And that's the important point we were covering. Now, another issue I'd like to address is complete addresses. When a message gets to its destination, we may or may not know how that message will be delivered. Now, in EOC, again, if we use our example of a point-to-point circuit between two county EOCs, a county EOC, and an incident command post, you may not need to have a complete address. Maybe Gerald Atchison, Denton County areas is sufficient. But when you're going through a complex system, obviously we want to have as many delivery options available as possible, okay? If you take a look at this message, I think you've probably already guessed what the problematic content is. And that, of course, is no phone, no email, okay? Leaving pretty much the only delivery option, and had this been, say, an emergency message or a priority message, the only delivery option would be to research the addressee or hand deliver it, which of course could take quite a bit of time, okay? And again, we see another one of those complex date time groups that really aren't necessary to temporal context within the emergency management environment. So the message here really is, it is not the delivering operator's job to research the contact information for the addressee. And quite frankly, if you're a busy Aries, OXCOM, REACT, or other MCOM volunteer or traffic handler in time of emergency, you probably won't have time to research this kind of data, okay? It doesn't matter much for routine radiograms because, quite frankly, we can stick them in an envelope and mail them, but it's a whole different ballgame in time of emergency. And you will respond in emergency as you train with routine messages. That's why we have routine radiograms. Is number one, it's kind of fun to push them around, participate in nets, but by the same token, what we're really doing is we're training to be emergency communicators. So, we have had people ask in prior presentations, well, why do you need a physical address, or phone and email? What if the internet's down? Well, you might classify disaster telecommunications scenarios into three groups, at least within this context. A communications outage at the point of origination. Okay, that is at the point of origination. Maybe the phones aren't working, but when that message gets to its point of delivery, email's available. Okay, communications outage at the point of delivery. People need options. Or the worst case scenario, a major disaster, maybe something international in scope. The worst case scenario, where there's communications outages at both the point of origination and point of delivery. But in most cases, the communications outage will be either at the point of origination or the point of delivery. So we want to have several options available. Here's another message that introduces some interesting interoperability issues. This is just the to and from lines at the top. We didn't display the whole thing. But let's take a look at the potentially problematic content. Anybody have any ideas on what the problematic content might be? Anybody want to maybe drop a response or speak up? Okay, well, it's getting close to 10 o'clock. So let's, yeah, go ahead.
I don't see a message.
I'm sorry?
I don't see a message.
Yeah, we didn't display it because it wasn't pertinent to the problematic content. So we just showed the from and to line in the network management data.
Okay.
And so anyway, I'll kind of lead you on because it's already 9:45, but it's the WinLink address. Now, when you originate an email via WinLink, it whitelists that email for response, okay? But if, for example, I take this from the WinLink gateway and I put it into a standard traffic net for delivery to the addressee, and they try to respond to that, or they otherwise try and use that WinLink address, they may not have access to it, particularly if the delivering station is not registered with WinLink. So there's nothing wrong with the WinLink address for some cases, but generally speaking, a commercial email is better. It's a little more flexible. When you get a radiogram ICS213 that may arrive by any number of modes, it may be the operator providing the outlet for that particular agency or community, does not have perhaps WinLink capability, he's not registered with the system, he will not be whitelisted, he won't be able to deliver a copy of that via WinLink. So generally speaking, we want to use a commercial email in the address, unless we know for sure, again, the exact environment in which message traffic is being conveyed, and we know that when that message arrives, it can be delivered via WinLink. Okay, so something to keep in mind is this little issue that not everybody can send a message to a WinLink address unless A, they're the originator who automatically whitelists the address, or the originator, or the person delivering the message, and the like, you know, or they actually are registered with WinLink and they can transmit a message to this person. So use WinLink addresses judiciously and always ask yourself, are there interoperability issues or reply issues associated with this WinLink address? So for example, if we put this in the from line, okay, and I deliver this, say, to a served agency official. Let's say Dale Bradshaw is a served agency official, and he incorporates a WinLink address with his name, okay? Well, that guy has a working internet at the delivery end, and he goes ahead and tries to send a message to Dale Bradshaw in reply. Of course, it would never arrive because he would not be whitelisted. Okay, here's another example. This is, again, just the address off of a message that was originated, I think because I've circled them, you can see the critical error in this message. Okay, so Robert Erickson, I spell Echo, Romeo, India, Kilo, Sierra, Oscar, November, Erickson. And then of course the email is, I spell Romeo, Papa, Echo, Romeo, India, Charlie, Kilo, Sierra, Oscar, November. It turns out when this message was, a copy of this message was transmitted via email for delivery, that somebody had put a C in here that doesn't exist. The correct email is RP Erickson without the C, same as you have up here, okay? So a typographical error could delay the delivery of a message when email is the mode of choice for its delivery, okay? So one of the interesting things about digital modes is that, you know, of course, we operate on the assumption, well, you know, they're automatic error correction. Well, that's true, unless when you type the message into the digital terminal, okay, you make an error typing. And that's essentially what's happened here is somebody out of habit spelled Erickson differently in the email address than it should have. Okay, and again, delayed messages can result in all kinds of issues. Small errors, say in requests for quantities of supplies, small errors in date time groups, resulting in temporal misplacement. all of these things can be problematic, not just for manual modes, but for digital modes. And quite frankly, it's very easy to not notice them, right? When you're typing into an email window or a digital window, you may not notice your own error. Ironically, one of the advantages of manual modes is because you do have to spell everything out and you kind of have to read it very carefully as you transmit it. Sometimes these will turn up when you're transmitting a message in a manual mode, yet they'll go unnoticed in digital work. Okay, so one of the things that if you have the personnel, if you're operating in a critical environment, say an EOC, for example, is to appoint a message court to review messages before transmission. It doesn't even need to be a ham. Somebody that looks for typos, looks for potential errors in formatting, and if there's any questions about something of this nature, they can go to the originator, okay, the agency official who signs the message and say, was this intentional? We just want to clarify it before we transmit it. And a lot of times that message court will see errors made by the originator. And this gives the originator an opportunity to make a correction or clarification before the message is actually transmitted. As a matter of fact, there's nothing wrong with saying, pardon me, but this message makes no sense to me. Is this what you intended? Okay. Because many of us, when we type something out or we write a message, we know what we want to say, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's either clear or understandable. So having a message clerk process working with the radio operator, even with digital modes, can be very, very useful. Another thing, too, that we want to talk about is this issue of how we interface with served agency officials. Okay, I think a lot of radio amateurs are kind of afraid to explain both our benefits and particularly our limitations. Okay, so one of the things that we need to do is we need to explain the value of brevity as a prerequisite to interoperability. That is, you can say in a served agency and served agency officials, we bring some very good things to the table, including survivability, decentralization, and dispersal within disaster areas. But in exchange for that survivability, that dispersal, that decentralization, we also have certain limitations. And in order to achieve leverage these benefits and to achieve interoperability, we need brief messages. We need to ensure that the message doesn't eat up a lot of our circuit capacity, right? It doesn't gum up our network. So we want brief messages. We want simple wording. We want abbreviations spelled out. We want limited punctuation, etc. And normally when you explain those things, they understand it. They say, okay, well, that makes sense to us. So don't be afraid to ask to get your needs met to ensure the efficient functioning of your network. And always remember that you are a peer in the emergency management process. You're a partner. You're providing a service and a coordinated response. We play nice in the sandbox, but it's very important as a peer in the emergency management process that we explain our benefits and our limitations. And that goes for transmitting message traffic as much as anything else. So here's a good, fun photo that illustrates this concept. So these are members of the League of Women Voters sending telegrams to Congress in opposition to the Bricker Amendment back in the 1950s. And I won't go into what the Bricker Amendments were, but you can look it up online, I suppose, or maybe some of you are old enough to remember. But you can see here that the Western Union Telegraph Office has 6 clerks. And there's a reason the commercial telegraph companies had clerks review messages when they were tendered for origination. The clerks understood the network, they understood its limitations, they understood its capabilities, they knew what the network required. And their job was to counsel the customer by saying, hey, Let's look over your message. Let's make sure it's drafted correctly. It's easy to understand, and we can transmit it on our network. This same process really applies to the MCOM environment. The radio amateur knows, he should know, the capabilities of his networks. The emergency coordinator and leadership officials should have the ability to make responsible emergency communications resource management decisions within the EMA process. And part of that involves ensuring that messages facilitate interoperability, which is essentially what these guys are doing here in the old time telegraph office. Finally, let's talk a little bit about delivering radiogram ICS213 messages. So we talked about origination concerns and some of the requirements and so on. But let's talk about what happens when a radiogram ICS213 message is delivered. Well, first and foremost, there's a lot of conventions in traffic handling that are going to be unknown to non-amateur addressees, particularly served agency officials. So, for example, in traffic handling, the X or X-ray represents a period. So we change the X-ray to a period. We use the term dash, okay, to represent Python. Well, obviously, we're going to do that conversion when we deliver the message. We use @ sign to represent the @ sign. We spell it out in a radiogram. Likewise, we spell out dot email addresses. These can all be converted to their standard convention, right? Many times we transmit complex numerical groups using the R for the decimal point. So, for example, 993.24 millibars will be transmitted in a radiogram as 993 Romeo 24, okay? But when you deliver it on the form, we would convert that to 993.24 millibars, okay? So here's an example. Here's the messages delivered on the left. Here's the message as originated in the system, okay? Here you can see the street is spelled out Jack-A-Row Drive. Here on the delivered form to the addressee, it's Jack-A-ROE, so Jack Row Drive, okay? Here you can see the X-ray is converted to a period. The @ signs are converted to the @ sign, and the dot is converted to the dot here, because this will make sense to a non-radio amateur, right? This stuff will not. So you have to take some of this into account when taking a message off of a traffic net, be it RRI, NTS, out of the WinLink gateway, whatever the case might be. Make these conversions when delivering the message. So this is how we might transmit a message, right? Here, radiogram ICS213, we have number 1, routine, hotel X-ray Charlie, etc. And you can see here, this is how we might do it on CW. CW has the added advantage, of course, of you can insert the American Morse comma, da-da-da-da, after each line or each component in the ICS213 message. Okay? So the da-da-da-da is comma in the American Morse code, and we still use it in this day and age to separate the components in the radiogram ICS213 message. And then, of course, this is the text as transmitted, okay, the X-ray, place the period, etc. End of message is da-da-da-da-it, okay, which is really FN for finished in American Morse code, by the way, just in case you were wondering about that. F in American Morse is da-da-it, and N is dotted. You put them together, you get da-da-da-da-it, or finished. So anyway, for the end of message. But this is a typical CW example, okay? And with an op note that, again, requesting delivery on RRI Form 1703. Transmitting it by voice is going to require a bit of intuition. Very important that the voice operator understand that it is a radiogram ICS213. You should be aware of the existence of Form 1703 and 1704. And once you tell him that, he should be able to easily discern the various components and where they go on the form, even though he doesn't have the benefit of that da-da-da-da, that pro sign or American Morse comma to separate them. But sequence remains very important in translation onto message forms. Okay. So let's see how we're doing on time. Oh, how do you like that? 10 o'clock. So I've managed to stuff this into an hour. We'll have a little extra time maybe for questions. Again, I want to stress that there's a lot of nuance to running an efficient, modernized traffic system. And unfortunately, the traffic system was kind of neglected for many decades, but we've modernized it and we have policies and procedures in place. And I would really recommend that those of you who might be using the traffic system look through our National Emergency Communications Response Guidelines. There's a lot of information there. Again, most training messages and exercise traffic originated as routine. But if you're going to actually be originating operational messages in an emergency situation, you really have to originate an activation request message to the RRI Emergency Management Director. This process is described on pages 3 and 29 of the National Response Plan, which is available on our website. I'll show you an example of that here in a few minutes. Again, I want to stress that there are two configurations for the traffic system, one of which is routine. This is our day-to-day 24/7 methodology. All traffic is generally treated as routine. We have just normal cycle of net schedules, perhaps the digital traffic station function and the WinLink gateways may only download traffic once or twice per day. And it may take 24, 72 hours for a routine message to move through the system based on the amount of volunteers that are available on any particular day. When you submit the activation request message, and you're going to originate radiograms or radiogram ICS213 messages, we have to activate the emergency response plan, right? And so we'll define the number of connects or the connect and download frequency for DTS and WinLink gateways. We might say every 15 minutes or every half hour, every hour, depending on the precedence of the traffic. We might establish special net sessions. We might stand up certain region nets. We might establish certain watch frequencies for priority or emergency traffic to expedite flow to an important agency. These are all things that we can do under emergency configuration. And of course, the whole idea here is that nobody wants to wait 72 hours for an emergency or priority message. So we need to have a network topology established in response to the emergency to expedite the flow of communications traffic. Radiogram ICS213s really aren't meant for day-to-day net operation. They're meant for training, they're meant for exercising, and they're really meant for disasters. So if you just want to send a message to a friend, thanking him for providing parts for restoring your HW101, the radiogram is the thing to use for training and exercising. You can use either. You can either use the radiogram or you can use the radiogram ICS213, depending on your preference. Some final thoughts. Always remember that all radiogram or radiogram ICS213 originations and deliveries must be professional, right? We want to put a professional spin on anything that we do within our abilities. Always pay close attention to detail. Look for small errors in phone numbers, conflicts in date time groups, problems with email addresses that can delay delivery or result in a lost message. Finally, when you originate a message, I don't care if it's a radiogram, an ICS213, a radiogram ICS213, or whatever, always imagine yourself standing at a temporary command post with a book of message forms a pencil, and a handheld or mobile radio. And ask yourself, in such circumstances, would I be able to convey lengthy, complex data in mixed case with all kinds of abbreviations and punctuations, different punctuation conventions? And the answer, I think, for most of us would be probably no. So understand network topology and what the limitations are, and what the potential unknowns are when you originate a message. If you know all of the details of network topology, how that message is going to flow, exactly what modes it's going to use, you can do more things with it. But when it comes to any kind of variables that might be present in the relay or delivery process or reaching that last mile, brevity, interoperability, no mixed case, abbreviations spelled out, no complex punctuation, etc. So that's the talk there. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to end the show, and then I'm going to go into some things online here that are available online for you to have a look at. And so we're going to start with radiogram forms. If you go to our webpage publication section, you can see these various fillable radiogram forms that you can use. So message number 21, precedence routine.
You're not showing your screen.
Oh, they're not showing?
Nope.
They're not showing. Okay, how come it says it should be? What are you seeing at the moment?
Some final thoughts.
Oh, okay. You know what? I think I know what's going on here. Let's see, new share. I think I have to select the thing. Okay, how's that?
Okay, we're good.
Okay, so yeah, I can go ahead and populate these as fillable PDFs. And then you can print them as an Adobe file and attach them to an email. You can print them out and hand deliver them, stick them in an envelope, whatever the case may be. So this is the standard radiogram form. And you can go to our webpage and find these under the publication section. Same thing here for the radiogram-ICS213. I can fill these out, and do that either at point of origination or point of delivery. Okay. So we have both of these options, and there's various versions of these available on the website. Well, let's see if I can minimize this just ever so slightly, because I can't quite, this little toolbar here at the top kind of thing. There we go. Here's a document that might be worth reading on our webpage. It's entitled Dispelling Mythology Surrounding the NIMS ICS213 Standard. It's essentially a bibliography of articles and reference materials that address some of the issues that we've discussed in the presentation. You can dig through these and read through them at your convenience. A lot of them address false and misleading information that's promulgated by, say, self-styled experts in the amateur radio community. And so in many respects, we deconstruct this misleading information, put things in the proper context, and create the proper narrative regarding NIMS ICS213. So that's available. Let's see, I think that's the same thing. There's an instruction thing here on our publications page on origination, delivery of radiogram ICS213 messages. So this is also available for your use. We originally put this together for Army Mars, but it applies to everybody. And then, of course, here's the National Communications Emergency Response Guidelines. And you can find this on our page, but if you come down here, I think it's to page 29. Here's the activation request message, kind of laid out with the information that's being requested. And you can go ahead and have a look at this too at your convenience. All of this stuff is available on our webpage. And let's see if I can find that webpage. Let's see, I need to minimize this too, I guess. Yeah, so all of this is available on our webpage. And again, let's see if we can kind of grow this a little bit. But here you can see, training materials. Here's the radiogram forms, various versions, the radiograms in ICS213 format, technical manuals, field manuals. There's a whole bunch of information on here. Some old exercise evaluation reports. And then, of course, there's some information. You can find the emergency communications plan on here somewhere. Let's see, where is it hiding? There we go. It's right here. Here's the emergency plan. So all of this is available to you online. And so let's do this. I've tried to keep it down to about an hour, a little over an hour. Let's start with the chat window, see if anybody has any questions. How do I learn more about being involved with RRI? Are you a membership organization? We are not a membership organization per se. We are our membership is NETs. So the NETs join RRI, but we do have what are called registered radio operators. So you can submit a registration form with RRI, and you will be recognized as a registered radio operator. You'll be put on our mailing list. You will receive emergency bulletins, et cetera, et cetera. We are a 501c3. We are not an organization in which you pay dues. We operate entirely on donations. And we set it up this way originally to insulate RRI from some of the petty politics that arises in amateur radio. We wanted to be entirely dependent on the goodwill of the amateur radio community, so we operate entirely on donations, voluntary donations. And we did not want to get into some of the politics that's harmed other amateur radio groups. But if you go here to our webpage, let me kind of scroll up here. There we go. You can come up here to, let's see. I got this thing in the way for a minute. Let's see. There's a thing here for donations. Let's see. Plan. Trying to remember where it's got to be here. I just disappeared at the bottom of the page. Bear with me. Oops. There we go. Registration. So you go to traffic ops registration. There's a registration form here that you can fill out. So this is it here. This is operator registration. You can fill it out and submit it to us. You'll get a welcome package in the mail, and you'll become part of our group of RRI registered radio operators. You can also register your state net, your local areas net, or whatever the case might be, as an RRI affiliated net. And if you really want to learn more about traffic handling, we do have a mentorship program, and there's a mentor application as well. So there you go. Any other questions? I don't see any more here on the chat. So let's do this. Let's go to, let's stop sharing the screen, and let's go to regular discussion. Let's see. Okay. So questions, comments, let's see.
Well, it's been a real good presentation. That's a comment from me.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, absolutely. Well, we aim to please.
You've done very well.
Yeah.
You have a question in chat, by the way.
Okay. Let's see here.
Is it possible to change
the form and win link? The date time origination is in the red box on the form. I'll have to go back and look at the form, Brad, and see what you're referencing. I'll dig into that and see Yeah, so I think that I'll go ahead and look at that and see if that's maybe creating some of the problems that we've discussed in the talk today.
Yeah, that was my question. Because in the box it's like saying subject and then date, time, and originated, and it's year, month, date, time, Zulu. So it seems like that's a necessary piece of it. But then at the top right on the RRI radiogram ICS213, there's a date. So that going through that training, it was like, well, I guess they obviously want us to put this in there, but it seems like it's changed or caused some trouble along the way. So thanks for letting me add that comment.
Oh yeah, that's actually a very good comment. That may explain where some of these are coming from. I was actually involved in the original development of the form, but it's gone through some iterations. So maybe we just need to ensure that the date time group is entered is automatically checked against the date time group in the preamble of the message. And I think that would solve the problem. And we'll have the software go back and check that. Okay, I've got a new message here. Okay, just thank you, I think, and the like. Any other questions, concerns, comments, etc.?
Well, James, I'd like to ask you if you would send me your presentation afterwards so I can get it posted out there.
Okay. Okay, be glad to do that. I'd be glad to do that. And yeah, I mean, if anybody has any questions, just drop me an email and, you know, let me know. Be happy to do that. Yeah.
I just got back, but if the date time group is already in the form someplace, why would you have the operator enter it a second time? Why not just have the form put it where it belongs?
Right. I agree with you. I think that we need to go back and revisit the software to prevent that confusion. Yeah, agreed. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's one of the tricks is keeping all your messaging and standards consistent. So we'll work on that.
What's your email address?
It's James. I spell Juliet Alpha Mike Echo Sierra James .Wades. I spell Whiskey Alpha Delta Echo Sierra Wades at radio-relay.org.
I'll put it in. I'll put that in the follow up when I send it out, so everybody will have it.
Yeah, that would be great. Of course, I'm good on QRZ. You can find my email as well. Whiskey Bravo 8 Sierra India Whiskey is the call. Any other questions, comments, concerns, etc., etc.?
I like the radios in the background.
Oh, yeah. There's nothing too modern and up to date back there, but they work. They all work. So yeah.
They do the job.
I'll make the comment that getting the QNI newsletter is worth any effort it takes or donation you feel you have to give to sign up with RRI. It's an outstanding newsletter.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Back issues of the QNI, by the way, are available online. You can go look at them. It's at www.qni, that's Quebec November India -newsletter .net, NET, QNI-newsletter.net, and there all the back issues are there. I think going back to 2012, and there's quite a bit of history there. Oh, I think you're muted. There you go.
If you happen to be one of the unfortunates who contacts a light case of the Delta, you can just hang out and read QNI. I promise you it'll keep you from getting bored.
Yeah. I speaking of Delta, I've got to do a talk at the National Railway Historical Society meeting on Friday night, and on the history of telegraphy. It's a program I've presented many times called Canst Thou Send Lightnings, but I'm a little worried about the Delta variant, to say the least.
You
Okay.
could ramp that up to very worried and you'd be well qualified.
Yeah, I definitely am worried about it. So there will be no lingering afterward.
All right.
Well, it was interesting. It was interesting, like our discussion before about the interoperability. I hope I can get some of my team members to get on RadPack to view your talk, because some of the people are have granite attenuators between their ears.
Well, you know, there's something in human nature where people seek validation. Um, you see it a lot in our current political landscape, and I don't care, you know, which side of the political axis you fall on. There's a tendency for people to seek out opinions, ideas, facts, data that validates what they think they already believe. And objective truth is often the first casualty in such circumstances. And you see this a little bit with ham radio operators. They have a certain range of experience. Maybe they have a certain mode parochialism. You see this a little bit with WinLink. You know, WinLink's a great tool. I really like WinLink. I'm a big supporter of the WinLink organization. That having been said, you run into the guy who says, well, all we'll ever need is WinLink. You know, I don't need to learn how to communicate using basic voice modes or CW, or we don't need to develop anything but WinLink. There's a certain mode parochialism that sometimes occurs within the amateur radio community. And I think sometimes there's also a bit of a simplistic view of the emergency management process and our role in it. And as a result, people make a lot of assumptions about communications practices. And, you know, of course, everybody has an opinion, right? But when you really see how the sausage is made, it always comes back down to this concept of brevity, efficiency, and simplicity usually win the day.
If most of you look like you're old enough to remember WordPerfect, and back when that was happening, everybody's first word processor was the only and best word processor. And it drove me crazy when people would adopt that attitude and refuse to accept this, that, or the other. And then Lotus Notes came along as a full office environment. And that panicked me because management liked the idea and everybody's buying into it, and nobody could make it actually work thoroughly the way it's designed. So as amateurs, I think our allegiance has to be to the message. All we care about is that what gets sent gets delivered. Otherwise, we're going to get up in a bunch of arguments.
Yeah, I think, you know, you have to divorce the medium from the message, right? And, you know, if you are managing an emergency communications program, the goal is to make what I call emergency communications resource management decisions. You identify the best mode for the application at hand, the best available mode.
I'm laughing because there's a whole science about using amateur radios in emergency management. So, and I think managing amateurs has proven to be a harder task than managing everything else there is to manage about emergencies, including communications.
Yeah, sort of like managing Amish draft mules. Sometimes anyway, you know, but amateur radio is rich with diverse talent and ideas and so forth. But you know, you are herding cats sometimes. I don't think anybody would argue that point.
Yeah. We're all humans. We can't divorce ourselves from that.
It's getting late on the East Coast. Some of those guys have got toothpicks in their eyelids. Is there anything here? Anything more? I don't see any hands up. I don't see anything in chat. Barry, do you see anything? Hello, Barry.
That last comment in chat is worthy. what we need to do is whatever our quote served agencies want of us, because otherwise we're inserting our beliefs about amateur radio in between the mission and what we're willing to do. And I think that's been a problem that's been accelerating in the last half decade, at least, with ARRL.
Yeah, I agree with Steve. It's very important to understand what the expectations are. It's a two-way street. The served agency needs to understand our limitations, as well as our benefits. But at the same time, we need to understand what their expectations are. And there's a dialogue there, right? There's a dialogue that should be taking place. And I think that there's a tendency for us, ironically, to not establish that dialogue. We're not communicating as we should on that kind of, let's call it managerial level.
You said dialogue that should take place. I'll argue and say the dialogue has to take place.
Okay, fair enough. I agree with that. I stand corrected. It does have to take place for sure.
Well, I might put a little plug in right here. For most of you, I'm sure already know, but tomorrow, Thursday, we have a series going on, and those our agencies, all different types of them there, FEMA, you name it, are telling us what they want, so and how they're doing it. So it's a good place to find out what's going on and ask those kind of questions.
Yep.
All right.
Yep, I agree.
Barry, are you there, or did you have to bail? Barry was having some weather problems, and so I think he bailed out. I think he is both fortunate and unfortunate living in Florida. Great place to live, but not when the storms come around.
Yeah, not a disaster benign state.
Yeah. Okay, let's get one more shot here. Any questions or comments? I don't see anything at either place. With that in mind, I'm going to shut this down. I want to thank you, James, for a great presentation. And if you'll send me that your presentation, if you can put it in PDF form, fine. If not, I'll convert to PDF form on this end. But
Sounds good, Dan. I'll convert it to PDF and send it to you.
okay, I guess it'd be easier to see me if I had my video on. I just noticed I had it turned off. I apologize for that.
We're radio guys. We don't need video.
No, none of that stuff. Why should we bother with this crazy stuff? All right. Well, again, thank you very much. At this point, I'm going to pull the plug and start working on massaging the video and getting it all ready for everybody to see afterwards. And hope to see most of you guys tomorrow. 73s.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.